This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here for Week 11. Tripp, we got some good matchups in the Big Ten. We have a quarterback change as well for a big team in the conference we'll dive into. But the nation has spoken this week, Tripp. We have finally, for the first time, learned answers of how the College Football Committee feels about what they've seen so far through the first 10 weeks of the season. We have the first batch of the rankings that truly matter. The College Football Playoff Committee has spoken. What's going on?
Not much. And yeah, I think it provided a nice little outlet and a distraction on Tuesday. You go, you get your voting sticker, come back home before you settle in and go to your preferred outlet of choice to follow the election results. You watch and tune into the College Football Playoff rankings. And I think a great sign for the Big Ten to have. Obviously, I think everyone assumed Oregon would be number one. Well, the Ducks are number one, but Ohio State 2, Penn State 6, Indiana maybe still a little undervalued at 8, but Indiana 8 in this first ranking. So the Big Ten with 4 of the top 8 teams. Obviously, those matchups as they showed the projected bracket, right? Indiana doesn't get a home game as what would be the 9 seed as of today, but there's still so much football to play out. To have 4 Big Ten teams in the top 8 speaks volumes about the conference. And then Ward Manuel, when he discussed how they came up with their rankings, how was Penn State impacted by a 20-13 loss at home against Ohio State? And I feel like anyone watching felt like Penn State could be between 5, 6, or probably even as low as like 9 or 10, because I feel like that group of Texas, Penn State, Tennessee, Indiana, BYU, Notre Dame, those one-loss teams, there's a little bit of, I think voters could look at them and for each team make a case or make an argument as to where they could be. And Indiana obviously unbeaten in that group, and there's some unbeaten teams there still too. But where those teams would stack up, and for the comments for Penn State fans after what was a gut-wrenching loss to Ohio State to hear that, hey, it came down to just 1 or 2 plays, it could have gone either way. I think all that bodes extremely well for the Big Ten coming out of these first rankings.
I think you're right. And I think the biggest thing is you saw the committee value and respect the Big Ten. Because I think one of the things that I was surprised about the most here was that they put Ohio State over Georgia at number 2. I think that was the right move, because I think when you look at Ohio State's resume in terms of the win they had at Penn State and also the loss they had 1 point on the road to Oregon, we're talking about 2 of the top 6 teams in the country they either beat or just barely lost to. And by the way, outside of Nebraska, have really taken care of business and left no doubt, right, in their other games. I think they've had an overall better season than what Georgia's done, where that was, a more dominant win at Texas for sure when they were number 1 in the country. So you can maybe argue Georgia's win is a little bit better. But I think right now their loss to Alabama is looking worse by the day as Alabama's played. And they've had some close calls against Kentucky, a 1-point win. They allowed 31 points to Mississippi State, one of the worst teams in the group, the Power 4. And even last week against Florida, a team with their third-string quarterback. We're talking about a close game late here. Georgia, even though they do have an impressive win, they've not left as much doubt, I think, as Ohio State has. I give the committee a lot of credit. I think they did the right thing here in giving Ohio State, I think, the rightful respect they deserve. And I think overall giving the Big Ten in general the rightful respect they deserve. Or like you said, 4 teams in the top 8 compared to 3 in the SEC. I think you have to feel good that the Big Ten, for maybe the first time in a long time, nationally at least, is being respected for the quality of teams and the quality opponents that they have this season.
And I don't want to make too much out of the first rankings, because we've seen the committee, their philosophy, we've seen it change through the years when it's a 4-team playoff and what will it ultimately look like as a 12-team playoff once everyone's full body of work is available end of November, end of that first week of December, and through the conference championship games. But it feels like, and I think we've talked about it, in Indiana still, I guess until they play Ohio State, like we can discuss how dominant they've been, where we feel like they would be if their name wasn't Indiana. And there certainly is brand value that is impacting, I think, where Indiana sits in the polls right now. But what we've seen is the margin, as we've discussed, we feel like Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, you can really nitpick and rank them a 1, 2, 3 and in that order. Or you could do a 1A, 1B, 1C, because we felt like the margin between those three teams is so slim this year. You could point to 4 or 5 opportunities in the Penn State, Ohio State game where you feel like it could go either way. Certainly, you could do the same thing in Ohio State's defeat on the road at Oregon. And it really feels like the committee, and having a committee to do it, is looking at the games, watching the games, and then is valuing not so much what are the quality of your wins, because it is undoubtedly that Georgia has a more, and they're ranked 3rd, so they're ahead of Penn State. But some of these teams, Notre Dame at Texas A&M is a quality win. Penn State doesn't have that caliber of a win on its resume to this point. But their loss is against the number 2 team in the country in a back-and-forth game at home. Meanwhile, Notre Dame's is against an NIU team at home. So it feels like the quality of your loss, at least in these first rankings, the quality of your loss does carry greater weight than, okay, we'll give you a free pass for a bad loss if you have a really good win to back it up. And it'll be interesting as the rankings continue to see. I think that's the pendulum that you're watching. Quality win versus quality loss. Where does that go? Do you get a free pass for a hiccup? Or you know what? You took care of business against everyone else. And oh, by the way, you played a great opponent, really tight. We're going to give you credit for playing that game in a game that could go either way. And those are the types of matchups that you'll see in a playoff.
I think the committee we talked about deserves credit for their Ohio State ranking. I think doing the right thing and pushing Ohio State above Georgia for number 2. But what is frustrating, and it sort of hits on what you're just talking about, the frustrating part for me after these rankings is the fact that it feels like they're judging these teams inconsistently, where some teams are getting viewed by certain criteria, other teams are getting judged by different criteria that doesn't match up. And I think Indiana right now, Indiana and BYU are the 2 biggest losers so far in the first ranking, just because you look at Indiana with how they've dominated. I get they've not played anybody, but you said it before. It does feel like there's brand bias here. It does feel like Indiana, if their name was anything else, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, if you just take away the logo and instead just put it any other, traditional blue blood logo compared to what they've done this season, I think they're a lot higher than 8. I think that right now we're talking about a top 5 team. And I want to prove a point here, Trip. I want to play a little game with you.
Okay.
To prove, I think Indiana got hosed. I have 4 teams in the top 12 from the College World Playoff rankings. I want to do a blind resume here. Spoiler, 1 is Indiana. I want you to guess and kind of see how these resumes stack up, because I think it proves the point that Indiana, if they were just any other team, would be a lot higher than 8. So I'll give you 2 teams at a time here. We'll start with Team A. Team A so far, their record is 9-0. They have 1 win over a current top 25 team. Their strength of schedule, 46. Their conference margin of victory is 11.2 points per game. They're the number 1 scoring offense in the country. Scoring defense, though, 52nd. So 9-0, 1 win over a top 25 team. Let's go to Team B here. And I probably should have ordered this better, so bear with me here. Team A, 9-0. Team B, 9-0. Team A, 1 win over a current top 25 team. Team B, 0 wins over a top 25 team. Strength of schedule for Team A, 46th. Current strength of schedule for Team B, 103. Conference margin of victory for Team A, 11.2 points per game. Current margin of victory in the conference for Team B, 26.6 points per game. Team A, number 1 scoring offense in the country. Team B, number 2. Team A, 52nd scoring defense. Team B, 7th scoring defense. When you hear those blind resumes here, which team, in your opinion, sounds deserving of the higher ranking? Is it Team A or Team B?
That's a tough one. And I know no teams in this really blow you away, because of scheduling in college football is really based on the strength of your conference schedule. And very few teams go out and challenge themselves with a marquee non-conference opponent. I think conference margin of victory of 27 points per game, 26.6, is really hard to overlook. Now, Team A does have the 1 win over a current top 25 team, is the number 1 scoring offense in the country, and does have a much greater strength of schedule. Really a coin toss, but I think when you're winning your conference games by 27 points per game in conference, that's hard to overlook. I'll go with Team B, and I think I know who Team B is.
It is who? Say it, Trip. You know it.
Yeah, it's the Indiana Hoosiers.
Who is Team A? Do you know? Because you sounded like you're you think this is pretty even for the most part.
I do. Is Team A BYU?
No. Team A, Miami.
Oh.
Who's number 4 in the country
sense, yeah.
compared to number 8 in Indiana. I mean, I think you look at the resume, it's pretty comparable outside of strength of schedule, but you look at, like you said, the conference dominance here. I don't think there's a bare minimum. I don't think there's Miami's deserving of being 4 spots higher than Indiana based on the resumes we're just talking about. And
that's one, Miami's an interesting case because you want to play blind resume. That's one thing. But if you've watched Miami's games and realize how many calls they've gotten in the final couple of minutes in at least 3 games this year.
Absolutely.
They have been, and sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Like, I'm not trying to go 9-0, to be dominant, to have a great offense, great quarterback. Like, no one's taking away what Miami's accomplished. But I think your point is made where Miami is 4 and Indiana, isn't in the same conversation. No one's saying Indiana should be above. Like, no one's putting Indiana in the same bracket as Georgia and Texas at this point. But Miami is in that same classification. So I think that's where your point is made. Yeah, well, it's because I agree with you. It's certainly brand bias has played a major role in this. And that's why, my concern for an Indiana and just doing the blind resume between Team A and Team B, and I know you have 2 other ones on here that we want to get to, but just what I hope for Indiana is that their entire season isn't judged on one game on November 23rd. And that's my fear for the Hoosiers, is that if they win, play well in Columbus, they're legit, but everyone can have a bad day. And Ohio State very well may be the best team in the country still. They very well may be, right? They proved some things in Happy Valley. Was it flashy? No. But for them to grind out that win and the goal line stop and that last drive with their physicality and to solve their only loss on the road in a game they could have won at Oregon came down to a yard, a second, one play. I hope Indiana's season isn't just judged based on what they do in Columbus, because an 11-1 Indiana team that's dominant in the Big Ten, and obviously they have Michigan this week, so they'll get a chance against a blue blood, big name program, but then they end with Purdue. So if they take care of business against Michigan, take care of business against Purdue, no matter what happens in Columbus, Indiana deserves to be in the college football playoff, playing in a conference like the Big Ten. I fear for them that if things go poorly in Columbus, because their name is Indiana, I think they might have to play the butt. That's where they would be one of those teams, 11, 12, 13, 14 range. And it just depends on the committee. I think because Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State have all been valued so high that they would make it. But I hope for Indiana's sake, their historic, remarkable, insert adjective here, season is not just judged based on score differential in Columbus.
I agree. And we talked about on Monday a little bit with the fear. And I think the committee right now validated that. And the blind resume is just an example to highlight the inconsistency. Like, the blind resume doesn't even highlight the fact that, like you said, Miami's 9-0 with a few close calls against in a conference way worse. We clearly see the committee values the Big Ten when they put Ohio State 2 and Oregon 1. They have 4 teams in the top 8. They clearly respect the level of play. Yet when it comes to Indiana, they look at they're a fun team, but they're not like, it's just maddening. And I'm with you, like, that is worrisome to where, like, I think an 11-1 Indiana is in. Even if they lose 14, 17 points to Ohio State, I think they're in. But I feel a little bit less confident in that now after seeing these initial rankings.
Let's just take it from this perspective. And I know Indiana does not have a win against a ranked opponent, and Penn State beat Illinois at home. And obviously, we're both Penn Staters. We both support Penn State. I get paid by Penn State. I work on their broadcasts. And this is not a knock on Penn State, because Penn State proved that they belong with Ohio State. even though the game didn't go their way. Yeah, the question is, can they get over the hurdle? But that doesn't mean they're not a top 12 team and a team that's deserving of a college football playoff bid. But if you look at one-loss Penn State and who they have beaten and how they have beaten those teams versus undefeated Indiana and who they have beaten, the opponent, the strength of the opponent, like, yeah, the win at West Virginia is nice, but West Virginia's not having a good year. Like, yeah, they beat Illinois at home, but, they took care of business. I don't think anyone thought Penn State was going to lose the game, but it was tight. It was a one-score game, fourth quarter. Indiana, other than that, you look at Penn State, okay, on the road at USC.
USC by the week.
USC is going to need a win to make a bowl game here in the final couple of weeks. 2 wins to make a bowl game in the final couple. They're 4-5. They need 2 wins to make a bowl game in the final couple of weeks. Like, yeah, it's a good win. USC has brand value, but how is that any different than what Indiana has done? And again, I think Penn State's right where they belong. I think that's the type of team they have. We've talked about it all year. But no one's knocking Penn State for not having beaten anyone. In fact, Warden Manuel's giving Penn State credit for some of the games they've won. Okay, and I don't disagree with that. But how Indiana has won and who they've beaten is comparable, if not equally as good. And they're 8 and a 1 loss because they've proven they can play with Ohio State. That's brand value. That is brand value, and there's brand bias in it with where Indiana's at right now. I think because of how it started, they'll finish in the top 12 as long as they go 2-1. But you just never know. It's weird. It's very interesting.
Season, it is. And like, they should be honestly in the top 5. Like, I think them and BYU should be top 5 teams based on what they've done right now. We'll see what happens when they play Ohio State in a few weeks, how they perform. But it's like right through, again, what the committee did, right? They judged every team through the first 8 or 9 games of the season. That's all. You're not projecting ahead. All you're doing is saying the first 10 weeks, this is what we see. This is how we rank these teams based on the first 2 months of football. With that said, sure, there are some teams with better schedules. And sure, there are some teams that have better wins than what Indiana has. But there has literally been nobody that's been more dominant. And in a year that's been filled with parity, where even the teams at the top have had close calls against inferior teams and needed a few things to go their way, Indiana's the only team right now that has come out and hammered everybody from the start. And I don't understand how you can't reward that. It's maddening here. To prove the point about, at least for me, being in the top 5, I want 2 more blind resume teams to throw by you here. We obviously know Team B is Indiana. So Indiana's record, and we'll put everything next to it, right? They're 9-0. Team C here, who is also ranked above Indiana in the playoff rankings. Indiana 9-0. Team C 7-1. Their 1 loss came to right now a team that's currently 10th in their conference standings. So a bad loss, if you will. Indiana 0 wins over a top 25 team. Team C does have 1 win over a current top 15 team in the country. Strength of schedule for Indiana, as we talked about, 103. Strength of schedule for Team C, 33. Conference margin of victory, 26.6 points per game for Indiana. Conference margin of victory for Team C, 8.2 points per game, basically a touchdown. Indiana, second-ranked highest scoring offense in the country, 7th-ranked defense. Team C has a 12th highest scoring offense, 5th scoring defense. When you look at Team C here and you look at the blind resume, would you say Indiana deserves to be ahead of where Team C is ranked right now?
Now, when we compared them to Miami, a 52 or a 46 strength of schedule and a 52 scoring defense, there's some serious flaws. Strength of schedule 33rd is in the top quarter of the country. And to be that balanced offensively and defensively, I understand, and a win against the top 15 team, and I'm assuming this is Tennessee having beaten Alabama. The conference margin of victory of 8.2, though, is really narrow, and Tennessee's played a lot of tight games in the SEC.
Against some bad teams.
Now, the strength of schedule would counter that and say, no, they're quality teams. Yeah, like...
No, I think Tennessee's 7, Indiana's 8. They're right there.
I think we're splitting hairs. But yeah, I think Indiana belongs. The loss came to a team that's 10th in its conference. How can you put an unbeaten Big Ten team below a team that has a loss against a team that's 10th in its conference?
Arkansas, and also too,
Yeah.
That scoring offense, I wasn't able to find in the SEC, but that scoring offense is padded 12 by playing some of these non-conference teams. NC State's solid, but like Chattanooga,
Kent
they put up
State.
66. Like they put up 70 against Kent. Like you look at Tennessee's offense in the SEC. I mean, they're playing some low-scoring games. 28 against Kentucky, 23 against Florida, 24 against Alabama, whose defense is not very good. Like it's again, you see by the conference margin of victory here, they're winning by basically a touchdown. And outside of Alabama, they've not really played anybody that's good so far. So it's like you look at Tennessee, sure, their win is better than anything Indiana has, anything. But the loss is also pretty bad to Arkansas. And you look like how they played the rest of the games. I really can't see right now, again, through 10 weeks, I can't see putting Tennessee above Indiana.
Tennessee has to go 3-1 to make the college football playoff. They're going to play Georgia. If they lose to Georgia, I think no harm, no foul, because you have the opportunity to make up that at the end of the year with another quality win against Vanderbilt. But Tennessee's going to have to go 3, and there are other games. It's a non-conference game, and
classic SEC.
Well, that's smart scheduling though in the SEC. They always have a non-conference game built in late in November, which is a cakewalk win. When you're going through a grueling schedule to set your teams up for postseason success, if you're going into a conference championship game, if you're going into the new format of the college football playoff, I think having a late bye or weak non-conference game with all the injuries you accumulate in a war of attrition, I don't know that it is a bad thing. But why do they have the flexibility to do it? Because they're playing 8 conference games in the SEC, and in the Big Ten, you're playing 9. And there needs to be an alignment across college football where every conference is playing 9 conference games.
That I 100% agree with. 100% agree with. And it's frustrating, but it's like, again, Tennessee's schedule, we can talk about how difficult. You look at it right now, at least they to me have not blown me away. And again, Alabama win is better what Indiana has, but you look at the level of dominance here, I think the Hoosiers deserve to get rewarded. One more team for you here. One more team I want to throw by you. So we know Indiana, right? They're 9-0 again. Team D, 7-1 also, and again, ranked ahead of Indiana. They, like Indiana, 0 wins over a current top 25 team in the country. Their strength of schedule, Team D, is 54th. Reminder, Indiana's is 103. The conference margin of victory for Team D, 18 points per game compared to Indiana's 26.6 points per game. They are tied for 16th in the country in scoring offense, Team D that is, where obviously Indiana's number 2. And this Team D has the number 2 scoring defense in the country, Indiana 7th. When you look at Team D again, 7-1, 0 wins over top 25 team. Strength of schedule is 54. 18 points per game is margin of victory in the conference. 16th scoring offense, 2nd ranked scoring defense. Who would you say deserves to be ranked higher in your opinion?
Indiana.
Do you know who Team D is?
Give it. Who is it?
Texas.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, right? The game against Michigan was hyped up in the beginning of the year, but now Michigan has fallen apart, and we're going to see now a common opponent this weekend when Indiana plays Michigan. They smoked Oklahoma, but Oklahoma is right now going to struggle to make a bowl game. They have 4 wins and no offense. So it's like some of the wins they had early in the year,
smoke and mirrors.
We got exactly, and the one loss they had, they were dominated,
and only beat Vanderbilt by 3.
Yes.
Wow. But it can be smoke and mirrors because you've dominated teams, right? And that, for the most part, they've dominated who they've supposed to.
We're talking about like Mississippi, but again,
I agree. I agree.
So did Indiana. So did without a loss and with an equal resume. Like it's just like when you look at these teams and you strip away the logos and the names, it is baffling that some of these teams are ranked higher right now than Indiana. And
that's
you go
the
back
one.
to the inconsistency.
Man. That's crazy. When you really dive into their schedule, and then not to mention who they still have, the only quality opponent left is Texas A&M for Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, for them to be fit, it is. You're right. That is a little smoke and mirrors. And they didn't play well against Georgia.
They got dominated. Like that game was a 15-point final, 30.
I mean, you could argue, and I didn't even think about this. You could make a real legitimate argument that Penn State and Tennessee should be ranked above Texas.
Yes.
As well.
I think all 3, like you look at Texas at 5, that's again part of
that's the brand, that's the name. Yeah.
And it's just if you're Indiana, and that's what brings me to this trip. When you look at Indiana, how can you fix this, right? How can you make a statement? This game against Michigan, I think actually works in their favor because this feels bigger than the record. Michigan's 5-4 and they're scuffling, right? But this is the first name brand, quote unquote, opponent they're playing on their schedule. I don't think they're going to get bouquets thrown at them if they, let's just say, stomp out Michigan, I don't know, 35-7 or whatever, and just leave no doubt like they've left no doubt for the rest of the season. Or like they have, I should say, up to this point. But it's like now you see these other schools, right, getting recognition and favorable rankings in part because they've beaten maybe not good teams, but other household names that aren't very good. This game for Indiana, I think can really help give yourself a boost just because you can finally now beat one of the quote unquote blue bloods in college football. And you're not just beating Nebraska or Washington or Michigan State. It's stupid, but I bet you Indiana's going to have, in terms of viewership around the country, this will be probably the most watched game for Indiana this season. And even though, again, Michigan's not very good, this feels like their best opportunity to send their first statement of the year because of the name. And I think it's wrong, but I think what we just highlighted in the rankings here proves that to be true.
Can I take the other side of it? Michigan right now is sitting at 4-5. Excuse me, 5-4. At 5-4. They're at Indiana versus Northwestern and at Ohio State. Obviously, heavy underdogs against Indiana, heavy underdogs against Ohio State. If they don't get up and play that Northwestern game, and they're not playing well, Michigan's not playing well right now.
No.
They have to win one of the last three to make a bowl game. Can you believe we're talking about that after they won the national championship last year? I mean, I think everyone knew there was going to be a decline and a fall off, but you're still thinking 8-9 wins. Michigan has to win. They're at 5-4. They have to win one of their last three games to make a bowl game. Now they host Northwestern.
Right.
But my gosh.
It's like if you're Sherrone Moore, like he's in no danger of getting fired. But like you look at in terms of like momentum for the program, right? Like you need, I mean, look, you beat Northwestern, you get to 6-6. Is anybody throwing a parade for you or saying that the program is saved? No. But boy, if you lose three straight, and again, like you said, heavy underdogs in 2 of the 3, and you can't get a home win against Northwestern, you're talking about a 5-7 season. You're having a lot of soul searching to do here. Yeah. You have a lot of questions to answer. And then you can blame, I don't know if it was just like, I don't know if it was overconfidence, hubris, if you will, in terms of what they accomplished last year and saying, okay, even though Jim's not here, Sherrone Moore is here, and everything else is changing, but everything remains the same. You have to look in the mirror big time. To Jim Harbaugh's credit, right after 2020, he looked in the mirror, made some big time changes, and turned that program around. It feels like after 2024, even if you beat Northwestern here at 6-6, it feels like you need a similar talking to and adjustment here to get Michigan back competitive anytime soon.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of stories out right now what they're trying to accomplish at the quarterback position, because if you don't have a quarterback, you can't compete in the Big Ten. We've seen that all season. It's proven in the modern era of college football, whether it's a running quarterback, a dual threat quarterback, or a pocket passing quarterback. You need a quarterback to be the foundation of competing in the Big Ten. This is a Michigan team, and they've battled injuries. Like, don't get me wrong, but they have 4 first-round NFL draft talents on their team, and they're going to finish the season at 6-6. I think there's some serious questions about their direction and Sherrone Moore. You mentioned safe, no doubt, but there's some serious conversations that need to be had in Ann Arbor about the direction where they want to go after this season. And Dave Portnoy's money isn't going to fix it all.
And about that, right? Because obviously that's the rumor, or at least the push. They're trying to get Bryce Underwood, big time, high school quarterback, to come to Michigan. When you look at their offense, I know the guy JJ McCarthy was highly recruited and he came in with this run first offense, no problem. But I feel like it is tougher now for Michigan if you want to get a big time quarterback in based on the offense of being, hey, we're going to play smash mouth physical football. And you're essentially going to be more of a game manager compared to a lot of other quarterbacks on the country where you're just kind of sitting back there and slinging it. I think it is a tougher sell for Michigan now. And again, you're right about quarterback, but I don't think it's as easy as, we're just going to throw the bag at the best quarterback who can. They're going to come here. Those quarterbacks are getting paid no matter where you're going, right? Like these highly ranked quarterbacks, no one's going to Alabama for a discount or Tennessee for a discount. You're getting paid. And so it's like, if you're going to get paid, let's say roughly equal to what, whatever every team is in the same ballpark, do you want to go play Michigan? Do you want to hand the ball off 25, 30 times? be asked to throw the ball 20 times and make a few plays, or do you want to sit back there and sling it? I think it's an interesting thought where if you're Sharon Moore, I know it worked for Jim Harbaugh. I think one of the things you have to contemplate is, what does your identity want to be? Do you still want to be a smash mouth team, or do you want to open it up more? If you want to open it up more, I think you're obviously more likely to get easier to sell a quarterback. But if you want to just rely on the identity that got you that 3-year dominance and a national title, I don't think just saying this offseason, get a quarterback and throw money at him, I don't think that's an easy solution.
The one team we haven't talked about in discussing these top 4 teams in the playoff, because I think at this point it's kind of taken for granted of how good Oregon has played and how well they've played here over the last 2 months. Obviously, sluggish start, still took care of business and put themselves in a position. And I still think they deserve more credit for the Boise State win than they've received to this point, because that's a team right now that is trending towards reaching the college football playoff. But Oregon, week in and week out, has gotten better and better and better. They're number 1. They won by 1 point at home against number 2. But is this truly, the way they're trending, their championship to lose? And they got a lot of good news this week.
They do. And I think so. I think part of that good news, like you said, is the reason why I feel optimistic. I think it is Oregon's title to lose. Number 1, the good news you talked about, Tez Johnson. Now, we don't have a timetable concretely for his return, but Dan Lanning did say that they're optimistic that he can return at some point this season, maybe not this week or the next 2 weeks, but it's not season ending, which, again, after Saturday and what Tez posted on social media, I at least kind of thought, that looks like it's done. It's over. But at least you should have your star receiver back at some point this season. They also suffered another injury in that game to their right guard, Marcus Harper, who also, again, does not seem to be seriously injured and should be back sooner rather than later. You also last week got Terrence Ferguson and Jordan Birch, 2 of their best players on offense and defense, respectively, back in the lineup. So now you're getting healthier. This is a team we talked about in Oregon that has gotten better every single week. And really, since week 2 at Boise State, they have left no doubt. They have just started running through teams and have playing really consistent football. They have tremendous balance offensively, where they're running the ball like one of the best teams in the country in conference play. So they're getting the ground game established. Obviously, we know how talented and prolific Dylan Gabriel is with those receivers, those speedsters on the outside. Tez Johnson, you mentioned, Evan Stewart. We saw Trayshawn Holden again step up in a big moment here against Michigan. So they have tremendous balance on offense. And now you're seeing this defense, again, play better each and every week, get some stops when it matters. They're physical, they're fast. I like how Oregon's playing. And again, getting better every week. Their aggressiveness, their speed, their physicality. And I look around the rest of the country. Tripp, I think it's Oregon's title to lose. I think it's still an upset and a disappointment if they don't win it. I think they're the best team in the country. For me, like when you talk about who's the favorite going forward here in the last month, it's Oregon. What are your thoughts?
And we're not going to learn anything about Oregon the rest of the way, too. They've outscored they've played weak opponents since they beat Ohio State. And I guess we should give Illinois a little more credit, right? But that's just that's a bad matchup for Illinois. It's just a bad matchup. But Oregon's outscored their last 3 opponents, 111-26. 111. And how do they end the regular season? Home against Maryland, at Wisconsin, which doesn't have a quarterback and doesn't have one for the foreseeable future, a bye week, and then they get Washington, but it's at home.
And that has been Dan Lanning's bugaboo.
Yeah.
0-3 against Huskies. But let me just say this really
it could be a 500. It could be a 500 Washington. So, what are we going to learn about? I agree with you. They are in the driver's seat until they reach that Big Ten championship game against Ohio State, or it's looking like Ohio State or Indiana right now, because Ohio State's going to have the tiebreaker on Penn State. They are in the driver's seat to be the number 1 seed. The biggest thing for me, and why do I bring that up? You just got to stay healthy.
No, you're right. The one thing I'll say about their strength of schedule, yes, since Oregon, again, they don't have a challenge, but I think it's also impressive when you're talking about they've outscored the last 3 opponents 111-26. You're not seeing that anywhere else around the country. Like, we are talking about some of the best teams in all of college football struggling against weaker opponents. And we almost saw Ohio State 2 weeks ago lose to Nebraska at home. We saw nearly Georgia facing a 3rd-string quarterback almost lose to Florida.
Excuse me. Let me bring this full circle. There's one other team that's been this dominant.
And?
They just don't have the one quality win. It's Indiana.
You're right. No, those are the 2 teams. But in terms of at least right now, a team at the top, in terms of you can't learn, you're right. there's nothing in Oregon can quote unquote win between now and the first week in December when you play the Big Ten title game, outside of just like I said, there's nothing you can do to impress anyone anymore. But I think with that said, with how inconsistent most outside of, like you said, the two teams in the Big Ten, most teams have been, I think you do deserve credit, even though, again, you're not like, no one's throwing bouquets at you if you beat Maryland 56-0. But that to me is important, just because you look at the parity this season and teams having close calls, they're doing what really nobody else is doing.
Where does that cliche come from? Because you've used it a couple of times today.
What cliche? I don't even know what I said.
Throwing bouquets at you. Like that's the third or fourth time you said throwing bouquets at you.
I don't know, but I kind of like it. I don't know. No, you don't like it? Well, what a cliche. You want?
No, it's good.
Showering them with praise?
Yeah.
Just picture someone pegging bouquets at somebody. I kind of like it. It's funny.
Two programs on the other side right now, right? USC and Nebraska not living up to expectations this season. Some of us had higher expectations than others for Nebraska. Both are on a bye this week, but then play each other in the Coliseum at 4:00 the following Saturday, November 16th. Nebraska 5-4. They just need one. Here they are sitting. We talked about it on Monday. Need one win to make a bowl game at USC, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa to end the regular season. Not the easiest stretch. USC home against Nebraska, across town against UCLA, so they're going to sleep in their beds the rest of the year, and then home against 10th ranked Notre Dame. But both of the little news offensively this week, USC finally is making the quarterback change, going to UNLV transfer Jayden Maiava. He's going to start after the bye. He's their number one guy at practice now. Lincoln Riley made a quarterback change once before. In 2021, benched Spencer Rattler for Caleb Williams.
Worked out, I would say.
Can Maiava change the perception of USC's season by finishing strong? And why did they make the change now? Why did they wait to make the change?
Why did they wait to make the change? I'll try to answer that question first here. I think in part because I think Lincoln Riley's trying to stave off some blame. Like this.
Are you saying he didn't want to make the change but had to because the heat elsewhere?
That's what it feels like to me. Because he's shown he's continuously talked about how much he likes Miller Moss. And again, he calls the plays like he trusts Miller Moss when they're throwing the ball 50, 55 times a game. If he didn't trust him, and by the way, you're running the ball really well. It's not like you can't run the ball. They are purposely choosing to throw the ball way more than run it. That, to me, at least signals you trust your quarterback and you believe he's the guy. Obviously, we've seen Miller Moss in a lot of these close games in the fourth quarter come up short of throwing interceptions. And so I think number one, it's easier when it's a bye week to integrate that change and get 2 weeks of practice to make sure that Maiava's debut is a little bit smoother compared to just 5 days of practice leading up to a game. But I also let me ask you this, Trip. Do you think he can provide false hope? Like if he comes in and plays well, and let's say USC wins 2 out of the next 3, they get to 6-6 and end with a little bit of positivity here. Is that real or is it more false hope? Because I could argue it's false hope because while the quarterback play, while Miller Moss has struggled, right? I don't think he's the number one problem with USC this year. I don't think he's been the number one reason why they're sitting here at 4-5. I look at other problems. I think Lincoln Riley's coaching. I think their toughness, frankly, on defense, especially. I think their inability. I think mental toughness is a real question because you're seeing now in the fourth quarter, this team, anytime it's a close game, they clam up. They can't make the plays on either side of the ball, and I think that starts up top. I think there's an uncertainty and here we go again, and it starts with Lincoln Riley and permeates down to the roster to where, sure, maybe a quarterback change gives you life. But I think it's like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. I don't think it actually solves the real internal cracks that right now are eating away at USC's foundation. Again, go back to last year. They had a great quarterback in Caleb Williams. He had a little bit of a down year compared to 2 years ago, but USC was 7-5, not because Caleb Williams stunk. I would say it wasn't bad at all, but because they had other issues all across the team. And I think those issues are again popping up this year, despite some changes with the personnel and the coaching. And so even though you're making a quarterback change and you could dress it up a little bit, maybe have a little bit better offense, and hell, maybe he makes a fourth quarter drive that Miller Moss could not. But I don't think it actually solves the true foundational problems with USC's program right now. that are preventing them from being one of the top teams in the Big Ten.
No, I think I agree with you. That's the biggest hurdle they have to accomplish and to get over that. And I don't think they have an opportunity. Nice cup, by the way. Champs Downtown. Is that that's a dirty Sprite cup that you're drinking out of, isn't it?
My girlfriend made sure, she goes, I love these cups. We're stealing it. So I did. I mean, I don't know if they allow you to take it out, but we committed robbery. Please don't tell the cops. I can't go to jail. But you witnessed a crime here on the pod.
I don't like the phrase false hope, though, because I think Maiava, if you look at what he did at UNLV, Mount West Freshman of the Year, 20 touchdowns, dual threat guy. They were 9-5. And there's some hype when he transferred into USC. While it wouldn't solve their major issue, and I don't know if they have certainly a game and a win against Notre Dame, depending on the fashion in which they do it and how they play in the bowl. If you end the season hot and all of a sudden you end at 8-5 with your bowl win, that's a completely different discussion. So I think there's still enough time. But until Lincoln Riley and USC, because it's been back-to-back seasons, they've had the same problems. You can't prove to me that you've changed and gotten through that by ending the year strong. That said, if Maiava's the guy moving forward and proves that he can be, I don't know that it's false hope. I think it's, okay, we're optimistic going into 2025 that this is the guy to get us there. But until they prove it in those tight, tough, like I agree with you on mental toughness, in those situations, we can't formulate a final opinion on Southern California and Lincoln Riley until, at this point, 2025, assuming he gets that opportunity.
That's why I use the term false hope, though, because it's like that's not a diss at Maiava. Like I think he is good, but like if he again comes in and let's say they go 3-1 down the stretch, they win a bowl game, they're 7-6, and all of a sudden you're feeling better than you did. Like those problems still exist. Like if Lincoln Riley fails to acknowledge them, like so far he did this past season, and like nothing changes on that aspect. What actually changes then? You may get an extra win or two from better quarterback play. But if you're sitting at 8-4, like what USC fan is signing up for 8-4 every year?
But you know where they would sign up for 8-4 right now? Nebraska. So Matt Rule is going to hire former Houston and West Virginia head coach Dana Holgorsen as an offensive consultant. Nebraska on that 3-game losing streak looked like a sure thing. They'd be in a bowl game this year, maybe even expectations higher than that, and compete for a college football playoff. But in 6 conference games, Nebraska ranks 12th in the Big Ten in offense, 14th in rush offense, 11th in passing offense. Marcus Satterfield is on the hot seat, their offensive coordinator. He's public enemy number 1 in Lincoln. Dylan Raiola has the 3rd most interceptions among Big Ten quarterbacks. Only Aiden Giles with 11, and our guy, Miller Moss, with 9, have more than Raiola. And he's thrown 6 picks and 1 touchdown in his last 4 games. He only has 1 touchdown pass. So Matt Rule right here saying, hey, we've got a problem. What can we do to try to fix this? And is Dana Holgorsen there for the long haul? Is he there for more than what he is right now, just a consultant role? But Nebraska trying to put a quick fix on something here as things have really spiraled in Lincoln.
And that's like where the concern is. And you heard Matt Rule this week in his press conference. He was asking basically, hey, Matt, what's wrong with the offense? And he goes, great question. Not good. Not good when you basically have to take the biggest breath of your life, take 10 seconds to think about, well, this. Like it is, I think it's broken. I don't want to say beyond repair, because I think, again, when you have a true freshman quarterback, like there are going to be bumps, and you have to think his development, maybe not linear, but it's still on the trajectory of going up and up. He has so much talent. Like this is, I think, part of the freshman bumps you kind of take. But I think at least when you look back to last game against UCLA, I think there were some flashes enough, and he made some plays, and his receivers made some plays as well to feel good about your future. This, though, does feel like a little bit like desperation for Matt Rule because of how last year started. When you get to 5 wins and lose out, right? You're 5-3 and then lose 4 in a row. And now you're starting to feel like the season's slipping again. I think it is right now a little bit of a peeking behind the curtain of just the lack of confidence he has in his offense to figure it out. And that is concerning. I think an offensive coordinator change, not in season at this point, I think it's too late, but I think in the offseason it will help Nebraska a lot. But between now and then, I mean, like, I don't know how much Dana Holgorsen is going to be able to help turn this offense around, but you talk about desperate. Boy, oh boy, that USC defense is up for grabs here in 2 weeks. That feels like a game you have to win.
Yeah, and I don't know that Dana Holgorsen is going to be the guy, right? He's accomplished in his career. He's worked with Graham Harrell and Case Keenum, Graham Harrell, Brandon Whedon, Geno Smith, Will Grier, and Clayton Tune. So all guys who have gone to the NFL or have had, remarkable college careers in pass space and pass first offenses. I don't know that he's going to be the guy, but to get that set of eyes in there and guide Rule in what that decision is for the future, I think it's a smart move by Matt Rule. I think at this point, not only is it a smart move to bring him in, but it was leaked to someone that was coming in and joining the squad until it's officially announced. They're looking for a little positive PR spin right now. And what can we do to, all our eggs are in the Raiola family's basket. What are we going to do to make sure they're heading in the right direction to end this year strong and start strong in 2025?
Do you think this is a sign of what their offense will look like next year? Like if you're bringing Dana Holgorsen, like you said, it's more of a open it up, pass first, if you want to call it a Big 12-esque offense.
Yeah.
Do you think that's kind of maybe this is a hint of what they're trying to turn the offense into next year?
That's a Matt Rule type pause I just had there because I'm contemplating the personnel that Nebraska is able to recruit. Like if you're going to shift, you better have the personnel to do it.
You're very right. You're very right. And that's where at least the transfer portal can help. You can get some receivers that are playmakers quicker compared to just having to recruit them. Like you see it with Nebraska, Iowa. Like there are places in the Midwest that just make it almost like the style of play is because of the recruiting base.
Remember, it was like one of the first weeks that we did the podcast. We talked about Big Ten West teams and their identity. How does that fit in a modern Big Ten? So it's not only those Pac-12 teams coming in, and some have been more successful than others with it, but can you still win with different styles of football in the Big Ten? Ultimately, when push comes to shove, the Penn State-Ohio State game was a good old-fashioned Big Ten football game that was decided on a couple of big plays, defense, and physicality. Now, Ohio State-Oregon was a little bit more, you need to be physical, but there's some big plays, you need skill. It was a little bit more open than the Penn State-Ohio State game. So I think you still can win different styles in the Big Ten, but I think you need to be able to be physical and have speed, skill, and great athletes to be among the top teams in the conference. Indiana's proven that as well to this point.
You're very right about that. And look, the Patrick Mahomes comps, right, are always made to Dylan Raiola, the look, the number. I mean, you've seen that offense now the past few years for Kansas City almost evolve to where it is more of like a check down, death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's no more like deep explosive plays. It is a lot of 7-yard hitches and 5-yard curls and slant. Like he gets the ball out of his hands relatively quickly. I wonder if you're Dylan Raiola and if you're Nebraska now going forward, where it's kind of more of a drop back pro style offense. If you know what, say, hey, look, you'll be in the shotgun, catch, throw, and just kind of get the ball out fast. Let your playmakers make some plays here. Could maybe work to the strength of everybody. But like you said, with Dana Holgorsen coming in, it seems like maybe that's the direction. Well, we'll see. It's interesting.
Yeah, I love when you reuse some of your tweets and your opinions on the podcast.
What was that one?
The death by 1,000 paper cuts line. You tweeted that over the weekend.
I did.
And death by 1,000 cuts is a Taylor Swift song, and the tight end for the Chiefs is Travis Kelce. So I see exactly what you're doing there. You're just trying to get the Swifties. You're trying to get the Swifties to engage with the podcast, knowing that would, as we promote, hey, make sure you're liking, subscribing, sharing, telling family, friends, colleagues, even people you don't like. Feel free to tell them to listen. You're just trying to get the Swifties involved, which I appreciate and I like.
I know you got that down, Pat. You got that fan base, but I'm trying. Maybe that's Nebraska's new OC next year. Taylor Swift. You heard Mahomes talk about how she draws up plays and loves football. You can have the Mahomes lookalike for Nebraska, and maybe she can be in the booth calling some plays, and you can have, I'm sure, a play called Death by 1,000 Cuts.
So let's get into our game previews this week.
Shocked you didn't like that idea. Figured that'd be right up your alley.
Let's start Friday night, the 6 p.m. Pacific game on Fox, so 9 Eastern time. Iowa 6-3, 4-2 in the Big Ten, 6.5-point favorites on the road in the Rose Bowl, taking on UCLA. 2 straight wins for the Bruins. They're 3-5, 2-4 in the conference. And UCLA, with those 2 wins in a row on the road, putting up 31 points per game. What's intriguing to you about this matchup?
The rushing offense of Iowa versus the rushing defense of UCLA. Caleb Johnson's been tremendous. And There's a chance here, Trip. If he has some big games and maybe Ashton Genty slows down, he's only 247 yards behind Genty in terms of the nation lead. Some big games here down the stretch. He could catch him. That would be a very interesting race to watch here, but he's been tremendous last week, 135 yards and 3 touchdowns. But you look at right now what UCLA has done. I mean, they're one of the best rush defenses in all the country, period. And now they're starting to roll offensively as well. You look at the spread. I think Iowa's going to win this game at 6.5. Or excuse me, I think Iowa's going to win this game straight up. I look at the 6.5. I like UCLA to keep this one close here. I think they can keep it close, make it competitive here. I think Iowa wins, but maybe something like 24-20, 27-23. I think UCLA can kind of continue the momentum they've had over their 2-game win streak here and make this game to where we're talking about a close game in the fourth quarter. What are you looking at?
I think Ethan Garbers has to continue to play consistent and not turn the football over. That's been the biggest thing. 6 touchdowns, no interceptions in their last 2 games. But I still don't think, I think UCLA, surprisingly, I thought they were the team that was going to spiral and not, they looked like they were a mess. And Deshaun, to their credit, they've been really competitive here, and they could have won at home against Minnesota. And all of a sudden you're looking at UCLA as a 500 team. Like, did they have a chance to get into a bowl game, which would be a remarkable turnaround for them. But I think Iowa has found something here offensively. They've scored 40 or more points in 3 of their last 4 games. And the success for Iowa is play smart offensive football, create explosive plays in the run game. Brendan Sullivan has not committed a turnover since replacing Caden McNamara at quarterback. And if Iowa's running the ball well, not turning it over at the quarterback position, they're going to play good defense. I think a run game and a defense travels. I think they cover and take it to UCLA. I think Iowa continues to play well here on the road on Friday night.
Let's go to Saturday, Trip. Quite the dichotomy here for Fox the last 2 weeks. You had Ohio State, Penn State, one of the most watched college football games of the season last week. You look at Big Noon kickoff this week, a little different. You have Ohio State, number 2 in the country, right? 7-1 on the season. They are hosting 1-7 Purdue, looking for their first Big Ten victory of the season. The Boilermakers only 38-point underdogs here for Big Noon kickoff. Upset? Come on, call it. I know you want to.
So the Ohio State-Penn State game drew about 9.5, 9.6 million, which was the biggest Big Noon audience of the year. Ohio State is going to still draw eyeballs. I really don't have anything else to add on this game. Ohio State lost to Oregon by 1, struggled against Nebraska. The momentum, it feels like that fourth quarter against Nebraska, when they went down, had the go-ahead scoring drive, had the stop at the end of the game. What they did at Penn State, probably figuring out a formula that works for them, at least for now, on the offensive line. It feels like momentum's like going up right now for Ohio State. This is one, just stay healthy and keep it rolling.
Could be grasping at straws here. The only other big game Ohio State played this year, like you mentioned, was Oregon. Now, they had a bye, but still came out slow. Looked like a little bit of a hangover. Big win after Penn State. Any hangover concern? In the sense of not covering the 38-point spread.
Come on. Let's just go on to the next game. Purdue's not good. Minnesota, 6-3.
48-7. Keep it
48-7? So that covers.
Did they come close to covering? Come close.
I mean, a 38-point spread in a conference game is unheard of. Minnesota 6. That's ridiculous. Minnesota 6-3, 4-2, 38 points in a conference game. That's crazy. That is crazy. Minnesota 6-3 overall, 4-2 in the Big Ten. 6-point favorites on the road at Rutgers. 4-4 overall, 1-4. It's spiraled here in the Big Ten. So you got hot Minnesota, Rutgers going the wrong way. They've had a ton of injuries. What's interesting about this game to me? It's at noon on NBC. You have Ethan Kaliak-Manis going against his former team, Greg Schiano against his former assistant, PJ Fleck. Kirk Sherrock is the offensive coordinator at Rutgers. He's been everywhere in the Big Ten. Minnesota defensive coordinator Corey Hetherman was a linebackers coach at Rutgers. So many connections between these two teams. Minnesota stays hot, and Rutgers, with all those injuries and not doing a whole lot on offense or defense right now, this is Minnesota. Minnesota rolls in Piscataway.
I'm with you. They keep rolling. And the interesting part of Minnesota's 4-game win streak trip is that they're mostly doing on the defensive side. Like in 3 of their 4 wins right now during the streak, they've only scored 25 or they've scored 25 points or less in 3 of the 4. So they're not blowing teams out and they're not lighting up the scoreboard here. They're winning low scoring defensive battles. With that said, I think they put a number on Rutgers. In part because Rutgers' rush defense right now, or Rutgers' defense overall, has been bad. 40 points per game allowed on average the last 3 games. They're allowing 180 rushing yards per game in that stretch as well. This defense has just the bottom has completely fallen out. I think Darius Taylor coming off a big game last week will continue that run the ball well for Minnesota. I think we're talking 28-7, 31-10. Like I think Minnesota hammers them here by 2 or 3 scores.
Rutgers' run defense allowing 5.1 yards per carry. That's 115th nationally. That's a bad formula against Darius Taylor. Another really good, Big Ten's loaded with running backs. Got to talk about him a little bit more. He is a really good running back for Minnesota. Michigan, 5-4, 3-3 at number 8 Indiana. Probably the premier matchup in the Big Ten this week. Indiana 9-0, 6-0 in conference, 14-point favorites at home against Michigan. You told me that coming into the year. I mean, 3:30 game on CBS. We mentioned this is a huge game for Indiana. How do you see it playing out?
Let me ask you this really fast. Is this the biggest home game in Indiana history?
I mean, I don't go back. I'm not an Indiana football historian back into the 50s and 60s, but it's definitely the biggest game since then.
And they have a chance to get 10 wins for the first time trip in program history. They've been around for 126 years and have never had a 10-win season. I would say yes in terms of obviously what's at stake this season. I mean, you have to win this game, right? If you're Indiana and have any sort of hope at making the playoff. And so big game in terms of what the stakes are, big game in terms of just the history of the program, in terms of, for the most part, how futile it's been. But with that said, you look at this game here, and obviously we've talked about Indiana's offense a ton, and they deserve a lot of credit because they're one of the best in the country.
Excuse me. Hey, come on now. I've talked about their defense a lot.
Okay, you have. I haven't. So I'm going to for the first time. How about that? I will not ignore a side of the ball that's been almost equally as dominant as their offense. And this is the number 1 rushing defense in all the country, allowing just 72 yards per game. Trip, that's a bad matchup here for Michigan because their only chance, right? We've seen Michigan try to pass the ball. It's ugly. Their only chance is trying to run the ball. Good luck. This is a stout run defense here. I think Indiana's defense dominates this game.
I think this is another 31-13 win type of thing for Indiana here. I don't see any reason to think otherwise.
Indiana's defense, they've allowed 100 yards rushing in 3 games total. 100 yards or more in a game 3 times so far out of 9 games. And you look at Michigan's offense, I mean, it's college football, right? Yards are given, points are given. It's a lot easier to move the ball and score in college compared to the NFL. With that said, Michigan's offense, in terms of total yards, has broken 300 yards of total offense or more against Power 4 opponents this season twice. Twice in 7 games, ironically, one against Illinois, the other against USC. They have not been able to move the ball consistently. They've not been able to put drives together. I'm with you. I'm 31-7. I think this is an absolute beatdown in Bloomington. I think Indiana continues to roll when they've won every game by 2 touchdowns so far, at least. That continues here. Indiana sends a statement at home. They roll the Wolverines to go to 10-0 on the year. Speaking of rolling, Trip, you could see that a lot here in Eugene on Saturday night, or I guess Saturday afternoon locally.
So you have Ohio State 38-point favorites at home this weekend. Typically a 25-point spread is big for a conference game. Oregon 25-point favorites against 4-4 Maryland, 1-4 in the Big Ten.
Feels low, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I agree with you.
It's a big spread for a conference game, but with that said, it's like
they were 21 point. Sorry, I was yapping over you, but they were 21-point favorites against Illinois
at home. Now, the one thing I'm interested in watching this game, because I think, like we talked about before with Oregon, right? Like this is not a statement win. They're playing 4-4 Maryland here. If you stop them out, no one's going to be. I'll skip the cliche here. No one's going to be giving you praise, right, for how impressive you were. But I think this is an interesting game in terms of Oregon's ability to truly win a national title, because this is one of the better pass offenses in the country coming into your building. And I think if you saw the game against Ohio State, one of the areas that Oregon's defense was susceptible in was the pass defense. You had Will Howard, 326 yards passing, just 7 incompletions in that game. You look at Maryland, I mean, they're 9th in the country in terms of passing offense. Billy Edwards Jr. is one of the This in terms of yards, one of the highest ranked quarterbacks in the country. Ty Felton is one of the best receivers in the country, 6th in receiving yards this season with 907. Like, I think this is a really good test for Oregon. Again, if you want to win a national title, you'll probably have to play Ohio State once, at least twice. You know, we've seen Texas, they have a lot of receivers and good quarterbacks that can put up yards. Indiana, same thing. Like, some of the teams you're going to have to beat here to win a national title can put up a lot of points and a lot of yards in the air. I think it's a good test here for Oregon. With that said, though, I think they pass it. I think they pass it pretty easily here. That 25-point spread, not in danger of being cover trip.
I think you're grasping at something and trying to find a flaw with Oregon that really doesn't exist. I think their pass rush will create all sorts of problems. And let me know what the passing numbers are after the first half, because a lot of times teams can rack up passing yards when they're down by 30 points in the second half. I think Oregon absolutely dominates this game, and they're still 17th in yards allowed, despite the 326 against Ohio. Like, yeah, I think you're grasping it. So you're trying to give us something to talk. You're trying to give us something to talk about in a game that
it's a 25-point spread. Yeah, Maryland's passing offense, their credit has been solid. I mean, it's not like it is one of the better ones.
That's what happens. That's what happens when you're down big every week. Washington 5-4, 3-3. This is the whiteout at Penn State. Penn State still 6th in the country, 7-1, 4-1, 13.5-point favorites. One of their bigger spreads, actually, over the last couple weeks. 13.5-point favorites, because they were 3.5 at USC, 6.5 at Washington or at Wisconsin, and then were underdogs by 3.5 against Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
And 13.5-point favorites at home. 8 o'clock, the whiteout gets the peacock treatment. Penn State needs to bounce back in this game.
Clearly, this is one we talked about Oregon before, kind of having nothing to win, if you will, quote unquote, between now and the Big Ten title game. This feels like one of those games where if you're Penn State, there's nothing you can gain here. There's nothing you can gain, because if you win and beat Washington, people are going to say, well, I mean, you lost Ohio State last week. Who cares? Washington's not very good. They're going to give you no credit. And obviously, if you lose, sky's falling. James Franklin's got to go. This team is frauds. Leave him out of the playoff. Like, the world is going to end if you lose the whiteout game at home to an average Washington team. Excuse me. There's nothing to gain here. And that's, to me, I think important to say, because I'm interested to see what Penn State team comes out. You know, this is a really tough spot here because, again, your whole season was last week. We talked about the buzz, the anticipation, the belief that this was going to be the year you beat Ohio State. They come close again, but don't do it. And unlike previous years, your season is far from over. So how quickly can you put that Ohio State loss behind you? How quickly can you rebound and improve? Because Washington's not coming in here as slouches. You know, this is not one of those games where you throw your helmets on and you're going to win. They're tough, especially defensively here. I think James Franklin, again, he won't get credit, but I think he should get credit here if we're talking about Penn State coming out and covering the spread, in part because I think there is an emotional letdown when you're talking about college kids, that if he can get them up, I think it'd be an impressive job here for the Nittany Lions in a game that, like you said, I feel like only negative things can come out of it.
Well, Penn State at this point is expected to go 11-1 with the remaining schedule. Home against Washington. Obviously, being at home is a huge advantage. Washington has not won a road game. Their home road splits are not good this year. So when they've been on the road, they have not been the same team with Will Rogers at quarterback, Jonah Coleman, good back, and we'll dive more into the matchup in just a moment. Penn State also has to go to Minnesota. They still have to go to Minnesota. But you feel like the other two games at Purdue, obviously home against Maryland, like they should go 4-0. And to your point, if they don't, the only thing that comes out of it is bad. Do they really have a lot to gain? Does Penn State at 10-2, you know, this is an interesting question. Does Penn State at 10-2, do they still find themselves on the playoff bubble? But that, you know, that's not, they're in position to host, and hosting's huge. And if you could be the 5 seed, that is huge. They're in position to host a college football playoff game. And that is because of what they've accomplished to this point, playing Ohio State. That's the expectation now. Anything less than that, even if they backed their way into the playoff, which I don't know that would be all that satisfying. You know, like that's the goal. Now it's 12 teams. Penn State's got to make the playoff because no team benefits from the expanded playoff format more than Penn State. No team in college football. But you don't want to back your way in. This is a big game for them to come back out. And in the new era of college football, it's a statement game. Okay, this is who we are. This is who we are. And for them to do it, typically I think, and they had this experience a couple of years ago where they lost at Michigan, tight game at halftime. Michigan took control of the game in the second half, came back home and played Minnesota in the whiteout. And you feel like the whiteout can be a huge lift to help you get up for the game. I don't know, and I don't know if the Peacock thing's a factor. I don't know if it's because Ohio State's lingering and all the emotion that went into last week. I'm not sure there's the buzz about the Penn State whiteout here that there typically is, because, and I think it's a mistake, and it's not a Penn State thing. I think it's all programs. Like, you try to manufacture so much with promotions and themes, and is it going to be a stripe out, a helmet stripe, a whiteout, that a student whiteout, whatever, maze out. It's not, again, it's not just a Penn State thing, but you kind of already had your whiteout against Illinois. You kind of already had another whiteout against Ohio State. The whiteout is meant to be special. It's meant to be saved for special moments. Now, because you've already had it essentially twice, now it's like, it's lost its luster. And I think you still need to have some organic moments in college football. And I caution against always trying to force a night whiteout. Why is it at night? Because it's important to have a whiteout at night for recruiting, to showcase that atmosphere to your fans. But you can't always force it. So I'm not sure that will lift them. That being said, I think the leadership, the character, like we talked about this being like a different special Penn State team, just because they lost last week, my opinion hasn't changed on that. So I think we see a good Penn State this weekend. But that doesn't mean this is an easy one, because of what I think there's some interesting things with the matchup.
And I think the matchup actually, I think this is good for Penn State, because when you look at Washington specifically defensively, right? They're number 2 in all the country in passing defense, 10th in total defense. Like, they are a damn good defense. And I think with how you lost last week against Ohio State, in which your offense scored 0 touchdowns, 2 field goals, and the receivers especially really kind of let you down here with some drops, not getting open, just not making plays. I think now when you face the challenge of a Washington and with their defense being so good, I think it's actually good for Penn State to kind of say, you know what? All right, we failed last week, but here's a big test. We can kind of get right back at it this week. I think there's an emphasis here on receiver play. That's definitely one thing I'm watching. Amari Evans, maybe we'll get him a target this week. Harrison Wallace, maybe we'll catch the ball a little bit more. I definitely anticipate Tyler Warren being a lot more involved compared to the 6 touches he had last week. I think this is, in terms of matchup, it's very tough. And again, I think it could provide for maybe a closer game than you think. But I think for Penn State, it's good that they are facing a challenging defense, because I think it almost in a way kind of helps push the Ohio State hangover past. Because you have to, if you do not come out focused and you still are thinking about Ohio State by the time this game kicks off, they could lose. Absolutely could lose.
I disagree with you on the matchups that you're identifying, though. I think this comes down to Penn State's running game against that Washington defense. It's certainly a better pass defense than run defense. Big Ten opponents the last 5 weeks have run against Washington for 184, 174, 220, 188, and 166 yards. Where's Penn State struggled right now offensively? They're not getting a push up front, and they're not running the football well. Katron Allen, 12 carries, 27 yards against Ohio State. Nicholas Singleton missed the UCLA game, had 10 carries for 26 yards against USC, 12 carries for 49 yards at Wisconsin, and 6 carries for 15 yards against Ohio State. Drew Aller and Tyler Warren were the team's 2 leading rushers against Ohio State. Penn State needs to be able to run the football against Washington to have success. They have to be able to run the football against Washington to have success. They have to. That's the first key matchup. The second, Penn State defensively needs to control Jonah Coleman. We can talk about Rodgers and his experience. He hasn't played well lately. He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass the last 2 weeks. He's turned the ball over a little bit for Washington, which is where Penn State, I think, can create some big plays defensively against the Washington pass game, but not if Washington is on schedule and ahead of the chains with Jonah Coleman. Coleman, 889 yards, over 6 yards per carry, back-to-back 100-yard games. Penn State defended the run extremely well against a more one-dimensional Wisconsin offense, and they forced the quarterback into negative situations behind the sticks, off schedule, and ultimately threw a pick 6 that decided the game. Penn State allowed 189 rushing yards against USC, and Woody Marks had a field day, and Quentin Joyner. Ohio State ran the ball from their own goal line out to midfield to end the game in the final 5 minutes last week against Penn State and had 176 rushing yards. Penn State's run defense against Jonah Coleman is a massive matchup in this game. It is a massive matchup in this game. And we can learn a lot about Penn State, I think, this weekend. Number one, how they bounce back, but also their run game and their run defense right now are a little bit of a question mark. And I think Penn State needs to come out and win those two areas, not only to cover that spread, but to win this football game at home.
Do you think they will? What do you think of the final score here?
I think Penn State looks good. I think they bounce back in a big way, a resounding win.
I would say 28-10. I think they win. I think they cover here. Maybe a little bit lower scoring. And Washington defense is very good, but I think 28-10.
I'd be a little bit more worried about this matchup if Penn State's on the road, but Washington having to come to Happy Valley.
True.
I think Washington has not played well on the road. I think there's something to it. And I think Penn State at home, whether it's a manufactured whiteout, organic, whatever it is, it's still a whiteout. I'm kind of contradicting myself. I do think it, ultimately when you walk in that stadium, crowd's going to be a factor. When people spend all day tailgating, the crowd will be a factor. And I think fans' minds have shifted. The cheapest ticket right now in the secondary market's like $90. That's still pretty good for a 110,000 seat stadium. That's not a cheap ticket. I think fans, team, they understand it still stings. I think it still stings. But when they walk into that stadium on Saturday, I think they'll come ready to play. And I think the fans will be there to support them too. And I think Penn State senses that shift, knows what's in front of them. And this is a team that's hungry for another opportunity when they get to December.
Last thing I was saying, I think the fan thing is interesting. If you're Washington, right? I know this is a key for every road game you're playing. Get off to a fast start. I get it. That's not rocket science. But I think getting off to a fast start in this game is important because if you can take the fans out of it early, if you're up 10-3, 10-0, 7-3 in the first quarter and dominating play, I think because of what just happened last week and a lot of fans are still frustrated, there could be a sense of, here we go again. Maybe that sucks the life out. Maybe it's more difficult for this whiteout energy to be felt and the whiteout crowd to be heard. That first quarter, if you're Washington here and you truly want to make this game or the whiteout, you want to negate it, you get off to a fast start, take the opening kickoff, go right down the field and score. I think you have a lot of fans sitting there in their seats in white saying, oh boy, here we go again. We've seen a collapse right in front of us. I think there is real doubt and questions, and you can only exacerbate that with a good start. And I think make that stadium, the whiteout, which is supposed to be one of the most hostile environments of all of college football, and I think it is in most cases, you can quickly negate that. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be very, very interesting, Trip. Fun podcast.
Yeah,
we got a big next few weeks here. I haven't said the word big yet, so I have to fit it in.
Yeah, go ahead. You got to meet the quota.
That's it. So thank you as always for joining us right here on the Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribing wherever you do listen. Tell your friends, Swifties or not, make sure they're listening to us. If Taylor Swift wants to interview for the Nebraska OC job, point her our way. We'll do the interview right here on the pod. I'm sure Trip would be excited. Actually, I think you'd be depressed about that. You don't want to see her as the OC. You want to see her performing, don't you? Wow. All right, Matt Rule. His Swiftie love. Look at he's silent. He's silent. He wants to see his girl on the stage performing Death by a Thousand Cuts amongst other songs as well. So with that said, enjoy the weekend. Have a great week 11. We'll talk to you on Monday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.